Sir, I'll have to ask you and your family to move to economy. The cabin went silent. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Ethan Cole looked up from his seat in the first class. Calm. Too calm. Across the aisle, a few passengers exchanged uneasy glances as the flight attendant's plastic smile began to wobble. Emily's hand tightened around little Noah's. The boy clutched his toy plane, eyes wide. He didn't understand the humiliation spreading through the air, but he felt it. Move to economy. Ethan repeated quietly, each word precise enough to make the attendant hesitate. Veronica straightened her badge, voice thin but firm. Yes, sir. There seems to be a problem with your booking. Ethan's eyes didn't blink. Problem? She swallowed. Your seats might have been assigned in error. Please gather your things. Emily froze. Passengers began whispering, some pretending not to look, others leaning closer. Ethan rose slowly, his calmness louder than anger. Let's make sure we understand this, he said, voice even. You're removing my family from the seats we paid for? It's procedure, Veronica muttered, already regretting how it sounded. Ethan held her stare a moment longer, then nodded once. Then by all means, let's follow procedure. The walk to the galley felt longer than the length of the aircraft. The hum of engines filled the silence between them. Veronica's posture screamed authority, but her fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve. She motioned toward the narrow space near the service phone. Sir, she began, first class is a premium cabin. We have to make sure every seat is properly verified. Verified, Ethan echoed. Interesting choice of word. What exactly needs verifying, the payment or the people? Her throat tightened. Nothing personal, sir. It's policy. Policy, he said softly, like he was tasting it. That word always sounds expensive when someone else pays for it. She forced a small laugh that went nowhere. If you'll just wait, I'll call the front desk. Go ahead, he said. Veronica dialed quickly. Hi, this is Veronica on Flight 419. Can you confirm a reservation for Ethan Cole? First class section, a pause. Then confusion on the other end. Yes, ma'am, the voice replied. Mr. Cole's tickets were purchased weeks ago. Fully confirmed. Veronica's smile stiffened. Right, thank you. She hung up, Ethan's brow lifted. All set? We're just double-checking, she lied. Please, remain here while I ensure everything's correct. He studied her face, every twitch, every blink. You know, he said finally, the problem with pretending to have power is that it disappears the second someone calls your bluff. Her cheeks flushed. Sir, I'm just doing my job. I'm sure you are. Back in first class, Emily sat rigid beside Noah. The boy tugged at her arm. Mommy, are we in trouble? She smiled tightly. No, honey. Daddy's just talking to the lady. A man across the aisle leaned over. You folks okay? We're fine, Emily said, though her voice trembled, but they weren't. Everyone could see it. The looks, the whispers, the unspoken judgment that somehow they didn't belong up there. In the galley, Veronica's colleague Grace appeared, brow furrowed. Everything all right? Working on it, Veronica replied. Grace peered at Ethan, then back at her. Those tickets looked fine to me. I know, Veronica snapped. But he... She stopped herself. But he what? Grace pressed. Veronica turned away. It doesn't matter. Grace's eyes narrowed. It matters if you're treating someone unfairly. Before Veronica could answer, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Cabin crew, please prepare for departure. Veronica drew a sharp breath. Sir, she said briskly, until this is resolved, I'll need you and your family to move to economy. Ethan's expression didn't change. On what grounds? As I said, protocol. He smiled faintly. Then let's make sure the right people hear about your protocol. He pulled out his phone, dialed once, and spoke so quietly that only she could hear. Yes, it's time. Go ahead. When he hung up, the smile was gone. Now, he said, shall we return to my family? The walk back felt heavier than before. The whispers had grown louder. Emily's eyes met his as he returned, questioning, protective, proud. It's handled, Ethan said simply, though his tone hinted otherwise. Before he could sit, Veronica stepped closer. "Sir, I'm sorry, but I must insist. Please relocate to the main cabin until we can sort this out." Emily inhaled sharply. "You're serious?" "Please, ma'am." Ethan stood again, adjusting his jacket with calm precision. "If you're calling security," he said evenly, "make sure they come prepared with a real explanation." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Someone whispered, "This is insane." Veronica's face reddened. "Sir, I don't want to escalate this." "Too late," he said quietly. "You already did." He turned to Emily. "Come on." Noah clutched his toy plane tighter as they gathered their things. The short walk through the curtain felt like a mile of shame. Coach was cramped, fluorescent, and loud. Ethan helped Emily and Noah into the middle seats, his expression unreadable. Up front, Veronica tried to ignore the murmurs now aimed at her. "That family had tickets," someone said. "Why'd she move them?" She picked up the galley phone again. "This is Veronica," she said, voice trembling. "Miss Cole," the captain replied, tone firm. "We just got a call from the executive team. They've been contacted directly by a passenger. Care to explain?" Her heart dropped. There was a mix-up." "Fix it," the captain said flatly. Now, she hung up slowly. The room tilted. Grace stared at her. "Who did you move, Veronica?" Veronica didn't answer. She already knew. Minutes later, she approached row 22, pale and shaking. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, "it seems there's been a misunderstanding. You and your family may return to first class." Ethan looked up. "A misunderstanding," he repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" Yes. I'm terribly sorry." Emily's eyes were cold enough to make her flinch. "Sorry doesn't erase humiliation." Veronica stepped aside. "Your seats are ready." Ethan rose. "Make sure they stay that way." As the family walked back up the aisle, passengers turned to watch, some with sympathy, others with disbelief. Back in first class, Veronica fussed over every detail, pillows straight, bottles opened, trays perfect. "If there's anything else you need, please let me know." Ethan nodded once. "You'll be the first to know." She retreated to the galley, her confidence gone. Grace leaned in. "You really don't know who that man is, do you?" Veronica frowned. "Why?" Grace lowered her voice. "Because if you did, you'd already be updating your resume." By the time the plane landed, the airline's boardroom phones were ringing non-stop. And Veronica Cole was about to learn she'd just tried to humiliate the man who owned the company. The captain's phone rang only once before he answered. "Flight 419, he said. The voice on the other end was calm. Too calm. "This is Robert Lang, CEO's office. One of your passengers has just contacted our executive line, Ethan Cole." The captain froze. The name hit like turbulence. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. "He's on board." "Then I suggest," the voice replied, "you find out why a man who owns half this airline is sitting in coach." In the galley, Veronica stood motionless. The captain's voice cracked through the intercom. "Miss Cole, contact me immediately." Grace looked at her. "You heard that?" Veronica's pulse roared in her ears. She snatched up the phone. "Captain, it's Veronica." "Miss Cole," he said, each word deliberate. "Mr. Cole is not just another passenger. He's an executive-level shareholder. I'm ordering you to fix whatever you've done, immediately." The line went dead. Veronica's knees almost buckled. "Shareholder?" she whispered. Grace folded her arms. "I tried to tell you." At the back of the plane, Ethan sat in silence. Emily brushed crumbs off Noah's lap, pretending not to notice the looks of pity around them. But Ethan wasn't humiliated. He was calculating. He lifted his phone again, typing a short message, "Initiate review protocol." Then he slid it into his jacket, as if the move had ended a conversation no one else could hear. Emily glanced at him. "You made the call, didn't you?" He nodded once. "They'll handle it. What happens now?" She whispered. "Accountability," he said. "That's what happens." Veronica walked the aisle like someone marching to her own trial. When she reached them, her voice was a fraction above a whisper. "Mr. Cole," she said, trembling, "I sincerely apologize. There's been an oversight. You and your family are invited back to first class." Ethan didn't move. "Oversight?" he repeated softly. "Yes, sir." Emily's eyes locked on Veronica's. "You dragged us down this aisle in front of everyone. Do you really think a two-word apology fixes that?" Noah looked up at her confused. "Mom, are we going back now?" "Yes, sweetheart," Emily said, her tone colder than steel. "Apparently they've remembered who we are." Ethan rose. "Lead the way." First class had never been quieter. As the Coles stepped through the curtain again, every head turned. A few passengers nodded in quiet solidarity. Others looked down, ashamed they hadn't spoken earlier. Veronica arranged their seats like a desperate artist. Bottled water, fresh linens, pillows aligned with military precision. "If there's anything," she began. Ethan stopped her with a small gesture. "You've done enough." She swallowed hard and stepped away. Grace met her at the galley door, whispering, "You have no idea what's coming when we land." The plane leveled at cruising altitude. Lights dimmed. The soft hum returned, but peace did not. Veronica stood frozen near the service station, rehearsing every line she'd have to give the captain, then HR, then, God help her, the board. Grace poured coffee into paper cups. "You should start writing your statement," she said quietly. Veronica didn't answer. Her mind replayed every second of the humiliation she'd caused, the look in Emily's eyes, the stillness in Ethan's. She'd mistaken patience for weakness. She was just realizing her mistake when the phone rang again. "Miss Cole," the captain said, voice clipped. "I've just received confirmation from the executive office. Mr. Cole's legal team is monitoring this flight in real time. Upon landing, you are to remain on board for debrief." Her breath caught. "Sir, Don't talk," he interrupted. "Just prepare a written account. And pray, it's enough." Grace watched her crumble. "You brought this on yourself," she said softly. Hours passed in uneasy quiet. Ethan's calm returned like gravity. He worked on his laptop, composed messages, and sipped coffee as though he were in an office, not a battlefield. Emily studied him. "You're really not angry?" He smiled faintly. "Anger wastes energy. I prefer results." Noah slept against her arm, his toy plane still clutched in tiny fingers. Behind them, Veronica tried to look busy, but every time she glanced toward row 2, she caught Ethan's reflection in the window, that unshakable calm that scared her more than yelling ever could. When the wheels finally touched down, passengers applauded softly, a ritual of relief. For Veronica, it sounded like a countdown. She stood at the front, forcing a smile as travelers collected their bags. Ethan, Emily, and Noah stayed seated. They weren't in a hurry. Power never is. The captain's voice came through her earpiece. "Security is waiting at the gate. Don't leave the plane." Her stomach dropped. Grace leaned in. "Told you," she murmured. When the last passenger left, 2 men in dark suits stepped aboard. "Miss Cole?" one asked. "Yes," she managed. "You'll need to remain for questioning," the taller one said. "The executive board has requested a full report." Ethan stood then, stretching slightly before collecting his briefcase. He walked past Veronica, pausing just long enough to meet her eyes. "I hope you've learned something about assumptions," he said quietly. "They come with a price tag." He stepped off the plane without another word. Emily followed, Noah asleep on her shoulder. Veronica's legs gave out the moment they disappeared down the jet bridge. Inside the terminal, Ethan's calm didn't fade. It sharpened. 2 executives were already waiting, stiff-backed, nervous smiles. "Mr. Cole," one began, "we're deeply sorry. I'm Richard Hale, Vice President of Operations. On behalf of the airline, we want to personally apologize for the conduct you experienced." Ethan nodded once. "Apologies are words," he said. "I'm interested in actions." "Of course," Hale replied quickly. "We've initiated an internal review and disciplinary procedures are underway. The flight attendant in question will be suspended pending investigation." Ethan's expression didn't flicker. "Suspension?" he repeated. "That's a start. But this is about more than one person. It's about culture. Hale nodded rapidly. "We understand completely." "I doubt that," Ethan said, voice soft but final. "You will," he turned to Emily. "Let's go." Back in the galley, Veronica sat between the security officers, her statement trembling in her hands. "Miss Cole," one said, "can you explain what made you decide to move the Coles?" She hesitated. "I thought there was a booking error." "Was there?" "No." "Then why remove them?" Her voice cracked. I thought they didn't fit the usual profile for first class." The words hung in the air, poisonous. The officer's tone hardened. "Do you understand what you just admitted?" Veronica nodded weakly. "Yes." Grace, standing nearby, whispered under her breath, "You just ended your career." That evening, in his study, Ethan opened his laptop. A dozen unread emails glowed from his legal team, the board, and the PR division. He ignored them all and began typing. "Effective immediately, I'm calling for a comprehensive review of all customer-facing policies. Every employee will undergo training on bias, accountability, and respect. This incident will not define us, but it will redefine us." He sent the message to the entire executive list. Emily stepped into the room, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You think they'll listen?" "They don't have a choice," he said. By sunrise, the story was everywhere. Headlines, hashtags, outrage. But for Ethan Cole, this was never about revenge. It was about rebuilding an empire, starting with one humiliating flight. The story broke before sunrise. "Airline under fire after humiliating major shareholder mid-flight," the headline read. Within hours, it was everywhere. CNN, Reddit, TikTok, morning talk shows. Clips from passengers had already surfaced. Ethan Cole's calm defiance, Emily's quiet composure, the stunned silence as they were told to move to economy. A 30-second video had gone viral, and the world wasn't about to let it go. The airline's PR department scrambled, but it was too late. The narrative had taken off faster than any plane ever could. Inside the Coles' home, the morning light poured across a quiet kitchen. Emily scrolled through the flood of messages on her phone. Reporters, friends, strangers offering support. Noah munched on cereal at the counter, humming to himself, blissfully unaware that his family had become headline news. Ethan, already dressed in his usual navy suit, poured coffee and said nothing. He didn't need to speak. He was watching the chaos he'd predicted unfold step by step. Emily glanced at him. "It's everywhere, Ethan. Everyone's talking about it." He nodded once. "Good," she frowned. "Good?" He took a sip of coffee. "Change doesn't happen quietly." At airline headquarters downtown, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Executives filled a glass-walled conference room, eyes glued to the TV on the far wall. Every major network carried the same headline: "Discrimination at 30,000 feet." Robert Lang, the CEO, slammed his pen onto the table. How did this even happen? A silence followed, the kind that careers don't survive. An HR director cleared her throat. The flight attendant involved, Veronica Cole, was acting on poor judgment. "Poor judgment," Robert shot back. "She dragged one of our primary shareholders out of first class in front of a cabin full of phones. That's not poor judgment, that's corporate suicide." Another executive, pale and sweating, added, "We've already suspended her pending investigation." "Suspended?" Robert snapped. "That's not going to save us. We need a full statement within the hour. And I want a meeting with Ethan Cole today." Meanwhile, Veronica sat alone in her small apartment. Her phone buzzed nonstop, messages from coworkers, reporters, and strangers online. She turned off the TV, but the noise of the world's judgment still found her. Her email notification blinked again. Termination hearing, 3:00 p.m. today. Her stomach twisted. For years, she'd prided herself on being efficient, respected, precise. But in a single flight, she'd become the face of everything wrong with customer service. She opened social media out of habit. A mistake. The comment sections were brutal. Entitled Attendant. Racist behavior caught on tape. Hope she never flies again. Veronica closed the app, her reflection ghosted in the black screen. Tears welled, not from sympathy for herself, but from realizing she'd built her whole career on protocols she'd never questioned. Now, those same protocols were destroying her. Back in his office, Ethan's phone vibrated. It was Robert Lang. "Ethan," Robert began, his tone strained. "First, let me say how sorry I am for what happened. Completely unacceptable. We're handling it internally." Ethan interrupted, calm but sharp. "You don't handle bias, Robert. You fix it, of course," Robert said quickly. "That's why I want to invite you to join us at headquarters today. We're launching an internal review. I'd value your input." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "You'll have it. But this won't be a PR cleanup. We're going to make structural changes." Robert hesitated. "Agreed." "Good," Ethan said. "Then I'll see you in an hour." When he hung up, Emily appeared in the doorway, arms folded. "You're going in, aren't you?" He nodded. "Someone has to make sure this doesn't happen again." Emily stepped closer. "And what if they try to minimize it?" Ethan's eyes hardened. "Then I remind them who signs the paychecks." At 11 a.m., Ethan walked into the airline's headquarters. Every employee in the lobby seemed to recognize him from the news. Whispers followed him down the marble hall. That's him. The passenger. The shareholder, Robert Lang, and a group of senior executives were waiting by the elevator. "Mr. Cole," Robert said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming." "Please, this way." They led him into the same boardroom where hours earlier they'd been panicking over his name. The tension was thick enough to taste. Robert gestured for Ethan to sit. "We're all deeply sorry for the humiliation you and your family endured." Ethan clasped his hands, expression unreadable. "Apologies noted. But let's talk about solutions." Robert nodded. "We've already terminated the employee involved." "Not enough," Ethan interrupted. "One person isn't the problem. The system that allowed it is." Robert looked at the others, then back at him. "What do you suggest?" Ethan leaned forward. His tone was calm, but carried the weight of command. Mandatory bias and sensitivity training for all staff, a third-party audit of company culture, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, regardless of position or tenure. Robert scribbled notes frantically. "Consider it done." "Good," Ethan said. "Then one more thing. I want this to be public, transparent. Let the world see that this company isn't hiding from accountability." A hush fell over the room. One executive whispered, "That'll spark lawsuits?" Ethan turned to him. "It'll prevent bigger ones," Robert exhaled. "You'll have our full cooperation," Ethan stood. "I'm sure I will." Across town, Veronica sat in a small conference room surrounded by HR officials. She'd been here before, on the other side of the table conducting interviews, enforcing policies. Now she was the policy. "Miss Cole," an HR manager began, "we've reviewed the footage and testimonies. Can you explain why you removed the Cole family from first class?" Veronica's voice cracked. "I thought there was a booking error." "There wasn't," the manager said evenly. "So why?" Veronica hesitated, tears forming. I made a judgment call. I didn't think they belonged there." The room went silent. "Didn't belong?" the HR manager repeated. "Based on what?" Veronica shook her head, ashamed. "I don't know. It wasn't conscious. I just acted on a bias," the manager finished. "And now the entire world knows it." That night, news anchors replayed the airline's press conference. Robert Lang stood at the podium, cameras flashing. "On behalf of our airline," he said, "we offer a formal apology to Mr. Ethan Cole and his family. Effective immediately, we are implementing company-wide reforms to ensure every passenger is treated with dignity and respect." The footage cut to Ethan, standing quietly beside him, calm, confident, untouchable. Reporters swarmed as he left the stage. "Mr. Cole, how do you feel about today's apology?" One shouted. Ethan paused. "It's a start," he said. "But change isn't measured by words. It's measured by what happens next." Later that night, Emily watched from their living room as the segment replayed. Ethan entered quietly, removing his jacket. "They're calling you a hero," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "I'm not interested in being a hero. I just want a world where Noah won't have to prove he belongs anywhere." Emily stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. "Then you already changed something," Ethan exhaled. For the first time since the flight, his shoulders relaxed. But across the city, in a dim apartment, Veronica Cole scrolled through her phone and saw his words trending everywhere. She whispered them under her breath. "Change isn't measured by words." And for the first time, she believed it. The headlines may have calmed down, but inside the airline, a deeper storm was brewing. And when Ethan Cole walked back into that boardroom a week later, he wasn't there for an apology. He was there to change the company forever. "You want to change the system?" The question came from the end of the long oak table. Sharp, skeptical, and just arrogant enough to hang in the air. Ethan Cole looked up slowly. The boardroom was full again, but this time it wasn't chaos. It was defense. "I don't want to change it," Ethan replied evenly. "I intend to rebuild it." The room fell silent. Robert Lang shifted in his seat, cautious. "Ethan, we've implemented the new training you recommended. The press has quieted down. Are you sure more action is necessary?" Ethan smiled faintly. Not friendly, but surgical. "The media storm isn't what concerns me, Robert. Culture does." He stood, buttoning his jacket, walking toward the massive glass window that overlooked the city. "Your employees didn't fail because they weren't trained. They failed because they were taught to follow rules instead of using judgment, to protect the brand instead of the people." A few board members exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't a meeting. It was a reckoning. 2 weeks had passed since the incident. Public outrage had cooled, but the world hadn't forgotten. Every post, every comment still echoed under the same hashtags. Heska Flyfair, Choose, Accountability, Matters, She Ethan Cole. The airline's stock had dipped, then rebounded, investors sensing something new in the air. Integrity, it turned out, was good business. Ethan didn't want revenge. He wanted transformation, and he'd just been handed the perfect leverage to make it happen. Across town, Veronica sat in a quiet diner, coffee untouched. Her career was over. The hearing had been swift. Termination with cause. She'd spent nights replaying that moment on the plane, the single second she'd let judgment override reason. The image of Ethan's calm eyes haunted her. Her phone buzzed. A new email notification. Diversity and Inclusion Seminar. Open enrollment. For a moment, she hovered over the delete button. Then, for the first time in days, she didn't press it. She opened the registration form instead. Because maybe, just maybe, growth began where comfort ended. Back at headquarters, Ethan faced the board. "I've reviewed your training modules," he said, dropping a thick binder onto the table. "They're outdated, reactive, and written to protect the company from lawsuits, not to protect the people who work for it." Robert rubbed his temple. "Then what are you proposing?" "A division," Ethan said. "Independent, transparent, one that reports directly to the board, not HR." He clicked the remote. The screen behind him lit up with a single phrase, "The Passenger Integrity Initiative." "The idea is simple," Ethan continued. "Every passenger, every employee, treated with equal respect, regardless of ticket, title, or uniform. Training will be personalized, continuous, and measurable. There will be quarterly audits, and I'll be overseeing it myself." A murmur rippled through the room. Robert frowned. "Ethan, that's a massive undertaking." Ethan looked right at him. So was flying the first airplane. No one had a response. Later that afternoon, Robert caught up with him near the elevators. "You're really serious about this," he said quietly. Ethan paused. "When I watched my son's face on that plane, confused about why we were being moved, yes, Robert, I decided to get serious." Robert nodded slowly. "You're turning a PR disaster into a legacy." Ethan's lips curved slightly. "That's the plan." Meanwhile, Emily was at home, watching Noah build a Lego airplane. "Look, Mommy," he said proudly, "This one doesn't crash," she smiled, pulling him into a hug. "That's a good one, sweetheart. Just make sure everyone gets to sit where they belong." Noah giggled. "Even the pilots?" "Especially the pilots." She glanced at the TV, where a news anchor discussed Ethan's proposed reform initiative. The words, "game-changing leadership," flashed across the screen. Emily felt pride swell in her chest. He hadn't just fought back. He'd built something better from the wreckage. That evening, Ethan sat alone in his office, the city lights stretching endlessly below. He replayed the flight in his mind. Not the humiliation, but the restraint. He'd seen it 1,000 times before in business. Power misused, respect misplaced, but this time it had been personal. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Robert stepped in. "There's someone here who'd like to see you," he said carefully. "Who?" Robert hesitated. "Veronica Cole." Ethan leaned back, surprise flickering for just a second. "Send her in." Veronica entered quietly, hands clasped, posture smaller than he remembered. "Mr. Cole," she said, voice trembling, "I needed to apologize face to face." Ethan studied her. No anger, just silence, the kind that made people tell the truth. "I don't expect forgiveness," she continued. "I just wanted to say I was wrong. About everything. I've started working with an inclusion nonprofit. I'm trying to learn what I never took time to see." Ethan finally spoke. "That's good. Most people wait until they're forced to." She nodded, tears gathering. "I'm sorry for what I did to your family." "To your son?" Ethan's expression softened just slightly. "Don't apologize to me, Ms. Cole. Apologize to yourself. Then do better. That's the only apology that lasts." She exhaled shakily, nodded, and left, a different person than the one who'd once stood over him with a clipboard and a fake smile. Weeks later, the Passenger Integrity Initiative launched publicly. Press conferences, interviews, headlines, all carrying the same message: accountability, equality, and change. The airline's competitors scrambled to follow suit. What had started as a moment of humiliation had become a movement of reform, and Ethan Cole, the man once told to move to economy, was now being called. The executive who made airlines human. Again. Months passed. On a cool spring morning, the Cole family boarded another flight. Same airline, same route. No cameras, no headlines, just quiet. The flight attendants greeted them with genuine warmth, not rehearsed politeness. "Welcome aboard, Mr. and Mrs. Cole," one said with a sincere smile. Emily looked at Ethan, whispering, "They know who you are." Ethan smiled back. "It's not about that. It's about how they treat everyone else." As the plane lifted, Noah pressed his nose against the window. "Dad, are we going to fly higher than last time?" Ethan smiled. "We already are, buddy. We already are." But even as the skies grew calmer, Ethan knew one thing. Real change never comes without resistance. And someone, somewhere inside the company, wasn't happy about the revolution he'd started. "Mr. Cole, someone's leaking your internal memos." The words hit like a shot across the table. Robert Lang's assistant had barely finished before the room erupted. "What do you mean, leaking?" one executive demanded. "To who?" "The press," she said nervously, setting a folder in front of them. "These were sent anonymously to several reporters this morning." Ethan reached for the folder without rushing. He flipped it open, scanning each page. Every line was his initiative, his words, now twisted into headlines that screamed, "Cole's power grab." "Airline whistleblower, new program is all optics." A slow breath escaped him. Not anger, calculation. "Who had access to these?" he asked. "Every department head," Robert admitted quietly. Ethan looked up, expression sharp. "Then it's one of them." Outside the boardroom, the storm had already begun. News anchors debated whether Ethan's reform movement was genuine or a PR stunt. Anonymous. Insiders whispered about favoritism and corporate theatrics. What none of them knew was that Ethan had expected this. Change, he'd learned long ago, always triggered one reaction before acceptance. fear. And fear was loud. Emily read the headlines at home, her stomach tightening. "Ethan, they're trying to turn this on you," she said over the phone. He was already reading the same thing. "That's how corruption works," he replied. "It doesn't fight you in the open. It hides behind policy." Noah ran past in his pajamas, holding his toy plane high above his head. "Look, Daddy, I'm flying again." Ethan smiled faintly, watching his son's innocence against the background of chaos. "I'll call you after the meeting," he said quietly, ending the call. At headquarters, the air was heavier than usual. People whispered when Ethan passed. Some looked away. Others nodded respectfully. It didn't matter which side they were on. They all knew who was in control. Robert intercepted him outside the elevator. "We've traced the leak to someone in operations," he said. "Name?" Ethan asked. "Not yet. But we have reason to believe someone wants your program shut down from the inside." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then let's find out who's afraid of change." In a quiet corner office, a man named Charles Denton, senior VP of operations, sat smirking over a newspaper. He'd been with the company for 25 years, long before Ethan's name meant anything outside of shareholder reports. "Cole thinks he's a savior," Charles muttered to his assistant. "All he's done is make this place unrecognizable. People are walking on eggshells. The old way worked just fine." His assistant shifted nervously. "Sir, with all due respect, public sentiment is on his side." Charles shot him a glare. "Public sentiment doesn't keep planes in the air. Money does. And the board listens to whoever controls the money." He tossed the paper aside. "If Cole wants a fight, he's got one." By evening, Ethan was in his office overlooking the city's skyline. The door opened softly. Robert stepped in, looking drained. "You were right," Robert said. "It's Denton. He's been feeding information to the press, twisting it to make your program look like self-promotion." Ethan leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I'm not surprised. He's been running this airline like it's his personal fiefdom for decades." Robert sighed. "He's got allies. People who think your reforms are making them look guilty." "They are guilty," Ethan replied flatly, "and it's time someone made them uncomfortable." That night, Ethan met Emily at home. She could tell from his silence that the battle had escalated. "Tell me," she said softly. He hesitated, then, "Someone inside leaked the documents. They're trying to paint this as a power grab." Emily folded her arms. "And what are you going to do?" "What I always do," he said quietly. "Turn the truth into the loudest weapon in the room." The next morning, Ethan scheduled a full company meeting. Every employee, from the pilots to the cleaning staff, received an invitation to a live broadcast titled "The Future of Fair Flight." When the feed went live, thousands tuned in. Employees in uniform stood by screens in airports across the country. Ethan stepped onto the stage. No script, no teleprompter, just truth. "Some of you have read the stories," he began. "They say this program is about control, about image, about one man's ego." He paused, letting the silence build. "I built this initiative because I watched my son ask why we were treated differently for no reason. Because no one should ever have to question whether they belong somewhere they've earned." Faces in the audience softened. Screens glowed across terminals. "This isn't about me," Ethan continued. "It's about all of you. About every flight attendant, every pilot, every mechanic who's ever been told to follow rules that don't make sense. The world is watching us. Not for how we fly, but for how we treat people. And that's something worth getting uncomfortable over." A wave of applause rolled through the crowd. Even in offices, employees began clapping. The live chat flooded with support. "About time. We needed this. Proud to work here." Watching from his office, Charles Denton's smile vanished. He'd expected backlash, not unity. Later that afternoon, Ethan received a call from Robert. "Whatever you just did," Robert said, "worked. Employees are rallying behind you. Denton's losing ground," Ethan exhaled. "Good, because tomorrow I'm cleaning house." That night, Charles stormed into Robert's office. "This is insane," he shouted. You're letting a shareholder run this airline like his personal crusade." Robert didn't even look up from his desk. "He's not running it, Charles. He's saving it. You can't be serious," Charles spat. "He's turning us into a headline factory." Robert finally looked at him. "You're the headline, Charles. You and every dinosaur clinging to the old ways." Charles froze. "You wouldn't—" "Your resignation letter's already been drafted," Robert interrupted calmly. "Security will escort you out." The color drained from Charles' face. "This isn't over." Robert's eyes hardened. "It is." By the weekend, the leaks had stopped. The rumors vanished. Ethan's reform wasn't just surviving, it was spreading. Other airlines began announcing their own integrity initiatives. Reporters called it the Cole effect. And for once, Ethan let himself feel it. The satisfaction of knowing that the storm he started had cleared the air for everyone else. At home, Emily found him on the porch, watching planes cut across the sunset sky. "You won," she said softly. Ethan shook his head. "No, we all did. The day people stop accepting what's wrong just because it's comfortable, that's the day we really start to fly." Noah ran up beside him, toy plane in hand. "Dad, next time can I sit by the window again?" Ethan smiled. "You can sit wherever you want. Buddy." As the boy took off running through the yard, chasing invisible clouds, Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper only Emily could hear. That's what this was always about. But just when the world thought Ethan Cole had changed the airline forever, a new scandal hit the headlines, one that would test everything he'd built, and force him to prove that real leadership means standing tall when the storm turns personal. It started with a single email. "Mr. Cole, there's a problem, and this one's personal." Ethan stared at the message glowing on his phone at 6:03 a.m. The sender, anonymous. The subject line, "Your program isn't as clean as you think." He opened it. Attached were screenshots, financial records, falsified reports, and employee complaints, all tied to the Passenger Integrity Initiative. The very project he'd built to clean the airline's reputation was now being accused of corruption. Emily found him standing by the window, coffee untouched. "What's wrong?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Someone's trying to dismantle everything, and they're using my name to do it." By 9 a.m., the news broke. Whistleblower claims Cole's reform program used for personal gain. Exclusive, leaked emails suggest mismanagement under Cole's watch. Cable news went into overdrive. Pundits debated whether Ethan Cole was a hero or a hypocrite. At headquarters, reporters swarmed the lobby. Employees whispered in the halls. The same people who once called him a savior now avoided eye contact. Robert Lang rushed into Ethan's office, face pale. "Ethan, I swear this didn't come from us. Someone planted this." Ethan held up a hand. "Calm down. Who benefits if I fall?" Robert hesitated. "You already got rid of Denton." "But he wasn't alone." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then let's find who's still hiding in the shadows." By noon, social media was on fire. A Cole scandal trended worldwide. Videos of old interviews and speeches resurfaced, spliced, edited, twisted to make him look self-righteous and arrogant. Emily's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friends, reporters, even strangers sent messages. "Is it true?" She turned on the TV just long enough to see a pundit sneer. Maybe Ethan Cole's moral compass was just good PR after all. She turned it off and whispered, "They don't know you." But Ethan did. He knew how the world worked. The same people who applauded your rise would happily film your fall. That evening, he met Robert and the legal team in a private conference room. Stacks of documents covered the table. "These so-called records," Robert said, pointing at the printouts, "were fabricated using old signatures and doctored email chains. The timestamps don't even match." Ethan studied the pages. "So we can prove it's fake?" "Yes, but not fast enough. The press has already decided you're guilty." Ethan leaned back. "Then we do what we always do. Turn their noise into evidence." He tapped his pen against the table. "Every audit, every payment, every report tied to the initiative, I want it all verified by an independent firm. Full transparency, Robert hesitated. That'll expose everything. Even internal data we've never shared. Ethan nodded. Exactly. If I'm going down, it's with the truth. Meanwhile, in a dim office across town, a familiar voice made a quiet phone call. Charles Denton, former VP, disgraced but not gone, smiled faintly as his contact answered. I told you, he said. If we can't destroy his reputation from the inside, we'll make the world do it for us. The voice on the other end laughed softly. And when the smoke clears? Then we'll rebuild the old way, Charles replied. Without him. Back at home, Emily watched Ethan sitting in silence, laptop open, documents scattered like a storm across the dining table. You could walk away, she said gently. You've done enough. The company's stable. People know what you stood for. Ethan looked up, eyes darker than usual. If I walk away now, I teach Noah that truth is negotiable. And I won't do that, Emily exhaled. Then I guess we fight, he smiled faintly. That's why I married you. The next morning, Ethan stepped into the boardroom again. The same one where it all began. But this time, it was different. The air was colder. The faces, less friendly. Reporters camped outside the glass walls as the board convened an emergency hearing. Robert stood beside him, loyal as ever. Across from them sat the company's PR director, the general counsel, and several board members who clearly smelled blood. Mr. Cole, one of them began, these allegations are serious. Misuse of funds, false reporting, this could destroy what's left of the company's credibility. Ethan nodded. Then you should be thankful I'm here to protect it. The man frowned. Protect it? Mr. Cole, you are the scandal. For the first time, Ethan's tone hardened. No, he said. The scandal is that this company let people like Denton operate unchecked for years. The difference between him and me is that I put everything in writing. He dropped a flash drive on the table. That's every transaction tied to the initiative. Real data, verified by an external audit firm. Check it. The boardroom went silent. Robert broke the tension. We'll distribute the report immediately. One board member muttered, If this comes back clean, we owe you a public apology. Ethan didn't flinch. You owe that to the passengers, not me. 2 days later, the report hit the press. Independent audit clears Ethan Cole of all allegations. Whistleblower linked to disgraced former executive Charles Denton. The narrative flipped overnight. The same news anchors who'd called Ethan a fraud now called him a man of integrity under fire. Emily watched him during the live interview that followed. How did you stay calm through all of this? The host asked. Ethan smiled faintly. Truth doesn't panic. That evening, as the dust settled, Robert visited his office. Everything's back to normal, he said. If anything, stronger than before. Ethan stared out the window at the skyline. Normal doesn't interest me. Growth does, Robert chuckled. You know, some people might have quit after what you went through. Some people, Ethan said quietly, weren't raised to stop when things got uncomfortable. He turned to Robert. Schedule a press conference. Tomorrow morning. I'm not done yet. At home, Emily poured 2 glasses of wine. Tomorrow's the conference? She asked. Ethan nodded. Time to tell them the truth about what this really was. She smiled. And what was it? He looked at her. Not a scandal. A stress test. And we passed. They clinked glasses. Outside, the city glowed under the night sky. Planes ascending, lights blinking in the dark. Each one a quiet reminder of what Ethan had fought for. But, just as Ethan Cole prepared to announce his biggest move yet, an unexpected visitor arrived at his office, someone from his past, holding a secret that could shake everything he thought he knew about loyalty, justice, and the price of power. The knock came 3 minutes before the press conference. 3 slow, deliberate taps, the kind that didn't belong to assistants or reporters. Ethan looked up from the speech on his desk. Come in. The door opened and Robert stepped aside to let the visitor enter. A woman, mid-30s, sharp suit, cooler eyes. Mr. Cole, she said quietly. It's been a long time. Ethan froze. "Laura," he said after a beat. "Didn't think I'd ever see you here again." She smiled without warmth. "You made sure of that, remember?" Robert glanced between them. "Should I—" Ethan waved him off. "Close the door." When it shut, the room shrank. Laura Bennett, former head of compliance. 5 years ago, she'd walked out of this building after uncovering a major safety violation. Ethan had supported her at first, until the board buried the story to protect stock value. He hadn't fought hard enough, and she'd taken the fall. Now she was back. Badge clipped to a federal lanyard. "I work with the Aviation Ethics Bureau," she said, "and we're reopening your old case." Ethan leaned back, expression unreadable. "After all these years?" "Because someone leaked a file," she replied. "One that ties the old safety scandal to the same executives you just exposed." He frowned. "Denton?" She shook her head. "Higher." Board level, the intercom buzzed. Robert's voice. "Ethan, media's waiting. 2 minutes." "Tell them to wait," Ethan said, eyes still on Laura. She slid a folder across the desk. "Inside is proof that the culture you're fixing started rotting long before you joined the board. It cost 2 maintenance workers their lives." He opened it. Photographs, reports, dates, every document stamped, classified, internal use only. His stomach turned. "You had this the whole time?" "I tried to bring it forward," she said. "You were the one who told me to trust the system, remember?" Silence. Heavy, accusing. "I trusted you, Ethan," she continued. "And when the company silenced me, I walked away. But now, you're the face of reform, the hero. So tell me, are you ready to finish what you should have started?" He closed the folder. "If what's in here is real, I'll back it publicly." Her eyes narrowed. "You sure? It'll cost the airline billions. Maybe your position, too," Ethan exhaled. "Then I'll pay it." Laura studied him for a moment, maybe looking for the old arrogance she remembered. Instead, she saw the calm resolve of a man who'd already survived his own firestorm. "Good," she said, "because I'm tired of being right in silence." Moments later, the elevator doors opened into the press auditorium. Flashbulbs exploded. Reporters surged forward. Ethan stepped to the podium, the folder tucked beneath his arm. Robert whispered, "We're live in 3, 2, Ethan scanned the crowd. "Before I begin, I need to address something new." A murmur swept through the room. 5 years ago, he said slowly, this company ignored internal warnings about maintenance irregularities. 2 employees paid for that silence with their lives. Gasps rippled through the hall. Cameras clicked faster. "I was part of that silence," Ethan continued, "and I won't be again. Effective immediately, I'm authorizing the release of all documents tied to those incidents and cooperating fully with federal investigators." Reporters shouted questions. Robert looked like he might faint. Ethan raised a hand. "You wanted transparency. You'll get it, even if it costs me my seat." When the conference ended, chaos followed. Phones rang. Stocks dipped. Commentators called it the boldest confession in corporate history. In a corner hallway, Laura caught up with him. "You really did it," she said. He smiled faintly. "You wanted accountability." "I wanted truth," she said. "Accountability is the byproduct," Robert hurried over, pale. "Ethan, the board's furious. They're calling an emergency session. They think you've just detonated the company." Ethan shrugged. "Sometimes you have to ground the plane to save the passengers." That night, Emily found him sitting alone in the living room, tie undone, TV on mute. "You did the right thing," she said. He nodded. "Right doesn't always feel good." She sat beside him. "Laura's case, that was before we met, wasn't it?" "Yes," he said. "And I let it get buried. I told myself it was out of my control. Turns out control's just an excuse people use to sleep at night." Emily placed her hand over his. "Then maybe this is your second chance to get it right." He looked at her and smiled. Tired, but lighter. "Maybe it is." Across town, in a dark apartment, Charles Denton watched the press conference replay. "Unbelievable," he muttered. His phone rang. "You see this?" a voice asked. "He just confessed on national TV," Denton sneered. Yeah, and he'll take half the board down with him. He's cleaning the house for us. Then what? Then, Denton said coldly, we make sure there's nothing left for him to rebuild. The next morning, headlines split down the middle. Ethan Cole, corporate whistleblower or saboteur. CEO faces internal revolt after exposing past cover-up. The same courage that had once made Ethan untouchable now made him dangerous. Robert burst into his office. They're voting tonight to remove you from the board. Ethan didn't look surprised. Good. It'll be easier to tell the truth when I'm not paid to lie. Robert's voice dropped. You could lose everything. Ethan smiled. Then maybe I'll finally find what's worth keeping. That afternoon, Laura met him at a cafe near the courthouse. You ready for this? She asked. Ethan nodded. Always. She studied him. You know, the world's not used to men in your position admitting they were wrong. He sipped his coffee. Then maybe it's time they were. She laughed softly. You really have changed. People do, he said. If they're willing to crash first. By sunset, cameras waited outside the courthouse. Ethan and Laura walked side by side, documents in hand. Reporters shouted questions as they entered. Inside, a federal clerk stamped the files. Official record. The scandal that had haunted the airline for years was finally in the open. For the first time in months, Ethan felt something close to peace. That night, back home, Emily handed him a glass of bourbon. To truth, she said. He raised his glass. And to never letting fear write the ending. They clinked glasses. Noah ran through the room with his toy airplane, laughing, making engine noises. Ethan watched him and murmured, The higher you fly, the more turbulence you face. Emily smiled. Then it's a good thing you built stronger wings. But as Ethan prepared to step away from the company for good, one final discovery changed everything. Proof that the corruption went deeper than anyone imagined, and that the real mastermind had been beside him the entire time. The truth didn't come from an investigator. It came from an email that wasn't meant for him. Subject: Confirm payment transfer, Phase 2. From Robert Lang to Charles Denton. Ethan stared at the screen, the words blurring for a heartbeat. Robert Lang, his ally, his friend, had been working with Denton the entire time. He clicked open the attachment. Financial ledgers, routing numbers, internal approvals. Every anonymous leak, every falsified invoice that almost ruined him, had been orchestrated from Robert's own office. A cold calm washed over him. He'd fought corruption on the outside. He'd never thought to look beside him. Hours later, Robert walked into the boardroom, pretending nothing had changed. Ethan, he greeted, smiling the same careful smile. Hey, big day. Media wants your comment after the court filing. Ethan interrupted. Sit down, Robert frowned. Something wrong? Ethan slid a printed copy of the email across the table. Robert's hand froze halfway to the chair. I'd ask how long you've been working with Denton, Ethan said quietly, but judging by this thread, I already know. Robert's mask slipped for a split second. Then the corporate charm returned. Ethan, listen. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Ethan cut in. You used me to rebuild the company's image while you cleaned up your own mess. You fed Denton information to frame me. And when that didn't work, you tried to burn the whole thing down. Robert exhaled, voice low. You think you can save this place without me? You needed someone who understood power, Ethan. You're the face, not the backbone. Ethan leaned forward, eyes steady. You're right. I needed someone who understood power. I just forgot power corrupts cowards faster than it tests them. Security footage would later show Robert storming out. But before he reached the elevator, Ethan's voice followed him like an echo. You're done, Robert. You don't own this story anymore. The next morning, Ethan went public again. At a televised press conference, he stood alone behind the podium. No board, no executives, no PR handler. He looked straight into the camera. Transparency only works if it applies to everyone, he began. Yesterday, I learned that my own colleague, Robert Lang, conspired with former executives to manipulate our reform process and cover up years of internal fraud. Effective immediately, he has been removed from all positions within the company. The investigation is ongoing." The reporters were silent for a moment before shouting questions. "Mr. Cole, how do you keep finding yourself in the middle of every scandal?" Ethan smiled slightly. "Because I stopped pretending not to see them." Across town, Robert watched from a hotel suite, the TV volume muted. The camera lingered on Ethan's steady face, his words unflinching. Robert threw a glass against the wall. "Enjoy the spotlight, Cole," he hissed. "The higher you climb, the harder you fall." But outside the hotel, FBI agents were already walking through the lobby. They had the transfer records, the emails, the evidence Ethan had quietly handed over hours before. By noon, Robert Lang was in custody. At headquarters, employees cheered when the news alert hit. Some cried. Others simply stood taller. One mechanic muttered, "First time I've seen a boss keep his promise." A flight attendant whispered, "He's the reason we believe again." For once, the airline felt human. That evening, Ethan and Emily walked through the empty terminal after hours. Airplanes sat in rows under silver light, tails marked with the company's logo, the symbol he'd just saved twice. Emily squeezed his hand. "It's over." Ethan shook his head. "Not over. Just clean," she smiled. "That's close enough." They paused by a window overlooking the runway. A plane taxied toward takeoff, its engines a low hum. Ethan watched it rise, climbing into the dark sky until it became a single moving star. "That's what truth does," he said softly. "It burns through the clouds." 2 weeks later, the board voted unanimously to name Ethan interim CEO. The decision wasn't about title. It was about trust. For the first time in years, employees applauded at a leadership announcement. During his first address as CEO, he spoke not from a script, but from memory. "I once sat in a seat that someone thought I didn't deserve. That moment taught me something I'll never forget. Dignity doesn't come with a price tag. It comes with choice. The choice to do what's right, even when it costs you everything else." Applause filled the hall. He finished simply, "From now on, this company flies on integrity." Meanwhile, Veronica Cole, the attendant who had once humiliated him, watched the speech online. She'd been volunteering with an outreach program, teaching new recruits how to identify bias and empathy in customer service. When Ethan mentioned choice, her eyes filled. She turned to the trainees beside her. "That's the man who gave me a second chance without even knowing it," she said softly. Months later, Ethan was invited to testify before a national ethics committee. His recommendations were adopted across the industry, setting new standards for how airlines handled both passengers and employees. Journalists called it the Cole Principle. But Ethan refused credit. "Principles aren't mine," he told them. "They belong to anyone brave enough to live by them." On a crisp spring morning, Ethan boarded a flight, not as an executive, but as a passenger again. Emily sat beside him reading. Noah, now a little older, pressed his face to the window as the plane accelerated. "Dad," he said, eyes wide, "remember when they told us we couldn't sit here?" Ethan smiled. "I remember. What about it?" Noah grinned. "Now they thank you for sitting here." Emily laughed, resting her head on Ethan's shoulder. "Funny how things change." Ethan looked out at the clouds, his reflection calm against the glass. "They don't change," he said. "People do." The plane climbed higher, sunlight flooding through the window, white clouds rolling below like a clean slate. For the first time in a long time, Ethan Cole allowed himself to breathe, not as the man who'd fought corruption, but as the one who'd finally outrun it. Veronica's reform program grew into a national training model. Laura Bennett was appointed to lead the Federal Oversight Division. Charles Denton pled guilty to obstruction, and Robert Lang's trial became a cautionary case study in business schools across the country. As for Ethan Cole, he kept his promise. He built a company where every ticket, every voice, every person mattered. And when reporters asked what kept him going, he always gave the same answer. "Because one day, my son will buy a ticket." And I want him to fly in a world that finally learned to stay upright when the truth hits turbulence. The engines roared. The sky opened. And this time, everyone was welcome aboard.